All those tattoos. Wonder what kind of trouble she's seen. The hushed remark floated through the air as the quiet server walked past their booth. But when she refilled coffee for a grizzled veteran, her sleeve shifted, exposing a specific tattoo, a symbol he believed had died with his nephew. The old man froze. "That can't be," he muttered. Who was she? And why did she wear the emblem of a squad that had vanished? What city are you watching this video from today? If you believe that unseen protectors still walk among us, stay tuned. Nora Fields, 29, had been working at Millie's Diner in northern Georgia for 3 years. She lived alone in a small room above the cafe, stayed mostly to herself, and wore long sleeves even in the peak of summer. Locals hardly knew a thing about her. She'd shown up one fall with a duffel bag and just enough cash to cover her first month's rent. She took every shift she could, only spoke when necessary, and never joined the gossip that buzzed around the counter. But there was something in the way she moved, precise, measured gestures that hinted at training not meant for waiting tables. Her gaze constantly swept the room, checking exits and reading body language like it was second nature, not fear, but habit. The diner had become an unofficial morning hangout for local veterans, men who'd fought in different wars but shared the bond that comes from surviving combat. They liked the peaceful setting and cheap breakfast, but most of all, they came for the sense of brotherhood. Raymond Clark, 76, was the group's unofficial leader. He had worked logistics in Afghanistan, stationed at the Pentagon, and his nephew, Landon, had been deployed with a special recon team to the same region. Landon had died in combat 12 years ago, leaving Raymond with memories and guilt even strong coffee couldn't ease. Nora always paid extra attention to Raymond, though she never said why. Whenever he sat alone, staring blankly into his cup, with that far-away look familiar to soldiers, she'd quietly place a slice of apple pie in front of him, on the house. "Today, sir," she'd say gently, then move away before he could respond. Raymond didn't know why, but something in her eyes brought back memories of Landon, not in appearance, but something deeper. The way she held herself, the dignity in her silence, the way she noticed things most missed. It was like she understood grief without needing it explained. The town's younger crowd wasn't as compassionate. A group of 20-somethings often made comments about Nora's look, especially the glimpses of ink that peeked from her cuffs and neckline. "Check her out, all tatted up like she's fresh out of lockup, not a waitress," one would mutter just loud enough. "Bet she ran from something bad before she landed here," another would add. Nora never replied. She just kept working, refilling mugs, clearing plates, with the same quiet focus she brought to everything. What no one realized was that every night, in the stillness of her small room, Nora would sit on her bed and stare at a worn military ID and a creased letter stamped MIA confirmed Kunar. The documents belonged to Staff Sergeant Nora Fields, 13th Echo Reconnaissance, declared missing in action during a Black Ops mission in Afghanistan's Kunar province. She'd picked this quiet town, this quiet job, because she needed to vanish from a world that thought she had died. She had lived while her entire squad had not, and that survival weighed heavier than any gear she'd ever carried. The broken wing eagle tattooed on her forearm wasn't just a unit symbol. It was a vow to carry the memory of the 8 fallen brothers who never got to come home. Raymond Clark had no clue that when he looked at Nora with that same aching sadness, he was staring at the last survivor of his nephew's unit. Sunday morning brought the usual faces to Millie's Diner. Raymond sat at his regular corner booth with 2 fellow vets, Eddie and Carlos, both Iraq war guys. The talk was light, the kind of back-and-forth banter old soldiers used to keep the shadows at bay. "Hey, Ray," Eddie grinned, "you keep eyeing that waitress. You sweet on her or what?" Raymond snorted and waved him off. Don't be ridiculous. She's just kind, that's all. Not like you two loudmouths." They all laughed. Old friends bonded by things they never needed to say out loud. Carlos leaned back, arms folded. "She's different, though, huh? Quiet, polite. Reminds me of some of the locals we worked with overseas. Same, I don't know, alert kind of vibe, like she sees everything." Raymond nodded. "She's got sharp instincts. Always knows when someone needs more coffee before they even ask." As if their words summoned her, Nora came to the table with the coffee pot. She moved with that graceful efficiency they all recognized. Her arms were still covered despite the warm Georgia morning. "Top-offs, gentlemen?" she asked softly. "Yes, please, dear," Raymond said, nudging his cup toward her. As she leaned forward to pour, her sleeve caught the corner of the sugar holder and slid upward. For a brief second, the tattoo on her left forearm was visible, a broken-wing eagle wrapped around an M4 rifle. It was faded, but unmistakable. Raymond had seen that exact emblem before, in a past he rarely spoke of. His hand slipped, and his cup clattered against the saucer. His face went pale, hands shaking. "Ray?" Eddie asked, suddenly serious. "You all right?" But Raymond didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on something he hadn't expected to ever see again. Something belonging to the dead. Nora quickly tugged her sleeve back down, but the damage was done. She'd seen it in his face, the shock, the recognition, the disbelief. "I'm sorry," she said softly, setting the coffee down with trembling fingers. "I should get back to work." "Wait," Raymond said, voice cracking. "Wait, please." The whole diner seemed to pause. Conversations faded as everyone sensed something meaningful unfolding in that back booth. Raymond's hands still trembled as he pulled out his wallet. From behind his ID, he unfolded a photo so worn the creases had turned white. It showed a young man in desert fatigues, smiling for the camera. On his left arm, clearly visible, was the same exact tattoo Nora bore. "This is my nephew," Raymond said, his voice heavy. "Landon Clark. He served with the 13th Echo Recon in Afghanistan. They told me the entire team was gone. No survivors, no remains recovered." Nora stared at the photo, and the tears came fast, sliding down her cheeks as she slowly lowered herself into the empty chair at their booth. Her carefully guarded composure cracked for the first time in 3 years. "Landon," she whispered, touching the picture with shaking fingers. He saved my life. Twice." The silence in the diner was absolute now. Even the clatter from the kitchen had faded. Carlos and Eddie looked at one another, wide-eyed with surprise and confusion. "You were there?" Raymond asked, leaning in, eyes fixed on her. "You knew him?" Nora nodded, speechless at first. When her voice returned, it was faint. "I was the only one who got out. The only one." She raised her gaze to Raymond, her eyes raw with guilt. "I'm supposed to be dead too. On paper, I am dead. But Landon, in those last seconds, he made sure I had a shot to get out. He gave his life to get me to the evac point." Raymond's eyes welled up. For a dozen years, he'd lived with uncertainty, wondering what his nephew's final minutes had been like, questioning if Landon had suffered, if he was afraid, if he'd known he was loved. "He spoke of you," Nora said, her voice gathering strength, "during the quiet hours on watch. He said you taught him how to fish, how to change a tire, how to be a man. He carried your photo in his helmet." Raymond covered his face with both hands, the emotion from over a decade of silence rushing in. Carlos and Eddie sat frozen, stunned, realizing they were witnessing something sacred. The moment when two people, tied by grief and love for the same man, found one another in the most unlikely place. In a quiet diner in northern Georgia, two strangers, decades apart in age, suddenly understood they'd both been carrying the same invisible scar, the same pain, the same devotion to a young soldier who had died a hero in a land few Americans could point out on a globe. They weren't alone in their loss anymore. Comment memory, if you believe that some kinds of grief can reach across time and connect people in profound ways. The diner stayed hushed as Raymond and Nora sat across from each other, a bond formed by a tattoo and a faded photo. The weight of 12 long years now hung between them like an unseen bridge neither had expected to cross. Millie, the diner's owner, came over softly. A woman in her 60s, she'd run the place for 3 decades and had witnessed her share of personal dramas. But nothing quite like this. "Sweetheart," she said gently to Nora, "why don't you go ahead and take your break? I'll watch your tables." Nora nodded, wiping her eyes with a napkin. Raymond looked at his friends, Carlos and Eddie, who were still seated nearby. "Would you two mind giving us a minute?" he asked quietly. "Of course," Carlos said, standing right away. Eddie followed but paused to rest a supportive hand on Raymond's shoulder. "We'll be over at the counter if you need us." Alone now, Raymond leaned forward, his voice soft but filled with urgency. "Tell me about him, please. Tell me about my nephew's last days." Nora drew in a shaky breath, finding strength somewhere deep within. For 3 years she'd carried those moments alone. Now she could finally give them to someone who understood their weight. "The 13th Echo Recon was a specialized unit," she began, her voice steadier now. "We were sent into Kunar province to locate and destroy a stockpile of stolen U.S. weapons that had fallen into Taliban hands. The op was supposed to be in and out." Raymond listened carefully, hands tightly clasped. Landon was our comms guy, but honestly, he was more than that. He held us together when everything fell apart. When the evac was blown and we were surrounded for 6 days, he gave up his water for the wounded, never once complained, never showed fear, even when we knew. She paused, trying to hold the memory. "Even when we knew we weren't going home," Raymond said for her. Nora nodded slowly. "He talked about you all the time, said you taught him to fish when he was 8, that you showed him how to tie a real knot, how to be patient. Said those fishing trips taught him to stay calm under pressure." Raymond's eyes were misty again. He was just a kid back then, couldn't sit still for 5 minutes, but he wanted to catch something so bad. "That patience saved lives," Nora said. "When we had to install comms under fire, when we had to wait hours for the right second to move, Landon would say, 'Uncle Ray always said the best time is worth waiting for.'" A soft smile broke through Raymond's tears. "Sounds like me." Nora reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn item. It was an old fishing lure, scratched and dull, the paint half gone. "He carried this," she said, placing it on the table. "Said it was from your first trip. He kept it with him always. He gave it to me before." She couldn't go on, but she didn't need to. Raymond understood. "Before he made sure you got out," he whispered. Nora nodded, the tears flowing again. "The extraction zone was 2 miles away, and we were surrounded. Landon stayed with 2 others to draw fire. He made me promise not to look back. He said, 'Tell Uncle Ray I remembered everything he taught me about courage.'" Raymond picked up the lure, his hands unsteady, eyes fixed on something he hadn't seen in over 15 years. It was just a plain spoon lure, silver with red stripes, the kind any bait shop sells. But to him, it was a summer memory frozen in time, a little boy determined to spend time with his uncle. "He did remember," Raymond murmured. "He remembered everything." Nora went on, her voice firmer now that the worst was said. "After I reached the evac point, I spent weeks in a hospital in Germany. Once I recovered enough to speak, they told me everything about the op had been classified, all files sealed. Officially, our unit didn't exist. Our deaths were labeled training accidents." "Why?" Raymond asked. Politics, Nora replied. The weapons cache we found included U.S. gear that had been sold illegally to overseas contractors. High-level people didn't want that known, so we were erased. Raymond took it in slowly, his heart burning, not with anger at Nora, but at a system that would bury honorable deaths to save face. I couldn't return to normal, Nora said quietly. Couldn't face the families of the fallen. Couldn't go back to living like nothing happened. When I was carrying 8 lives on my back, so I vanished too. Built a new name, found this quiet place, and tried to honor them by living a life that was simple and real. They died protecting. Raymond reached across the table and gently took her hand in his aged fingers. You've been holding this on your own for 12 years? Yes, she breathed. Well, not anymore, he said with quiet resolve. Landon saved you for a reason. Maybe this is it. Maybe you were meant to end up here at this table to tell me that my nephew died a hero. Raymond stood slowly, his joints protesting the motion, and then, to Nora's surprise, he raised his hand in a formal salute. Thank you for bringing him back to me, he said, his voice thick with feeling. Thank you for keeping his memory alive. Other veterans in the diner had noticed Raymond's salute. Gradually they rose from their seats and joined in. Carlos and Eddie stood at the counter, a gray-haired Navy vet at the window booth, a woman in her 40s who had deployed to Iraq. Soon every veteran in Millie's diner was standing at attention, not only for Nora, but for the 8 lost soldiers whose mission had never been acknowledged. For the first time in 12 years, Staff Sergeant Nora Fields felt like she had finally come home. The next day, Millie's diner looked changed. Where the wall behind the counter had once been bare, a wooden frame now hung proudly. Inside it was a photo of the 13th Echo Recon Team, 9 soldiers on a dusty Afghan hillside, including a younger Landon Clark and Staff Sergeant Nora Fields. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, "In honor of those who served but were erased." Millie had worked through the night to make it happen, driving to the next town to find a framing shop that would open early. She also handed Nora a new apron, embroidered with a small broken-wing eagle over the chest. Every hero deserves to wear their colors, Millie said simply when she gave it to her. Word had spread through the town overnight, the way news travels where everyone knows everyone else. But instead of the usual rumors and snide remarks, something different took hold. The same young folks who had mocked Nora's ink now passed her tables in respectful silence. Many left handwritten messages with their tips. Thanks for what you did, Red One. Sorry we judged you, another note read. That morning, Raymond showed up early carrying a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in tissue, were Landon's service medals, awards the family had received when he was listed as killed in a training mishap. These belong with someone who understands what he died for, Raymond said, placing the box before Nora. She shook her head. I can't accept these. They're yours. No, Raymond said firmly. They're ours. Landon would want both of us to share the duty of preserving his legacy. Later that day, Raymond announced the start of the Veterans Coffee Circle, a weekly meetup where veterans could talk, support one another, and remember the ones who never came home. Nora was invited as the special guest for the first gathering. For the first time in 12 years, she opened up publicly about her deployment. She spoke their names, their hometowns, their ambitions. She described how Private Martinez always showed off photos of his twin girls, how Sergeant Wong could make them laugh under fire, how Corporal Jackson had plans to become a teacher after the war. The room listened in silence, the kind that comes from deep understanding. These weren't war stories. They were sacred memories of people who had laid down everything. And by sharing them, Nora gave those lives a second chance to be remembered. When she finished, The room was full of tears, but more than that, it was full of something unspoken connection. These veterans knew exactly what it meant to carry survivor's guilt, to wake up every day and ask why they had lived when others hadn't. The most moving moment came when Jake, the young man who had once made the cruelest jokes about Nora, approached the group. He held 2 cups of coffee, his hands a little unsteady. "Ma'am," he said, placing the drinks on the table, "this one's on me today, and I'm sorry for everything." He turned quickly to go, but Raymond called after him. "Son," he said calmly, "the best way to apologize is to grow from your mistakes. Stay a while. Listen to what's being said here. You might learn what strength really looks like." Jake nodded and found a seat in the back, ready to absorb truths no movie or video game could replicate. For the first time since she arrived in this Georgia town, Nora felt fully seen, not as some mysterious server covered in tattoos, but as a protector of sacred memories, a living tribute to those who never made it back. 6 months later, Millie's Diner had transformed into something unique. Veterans from across 3 counties now came weekly for the coffee circle, drawn by stories that mattered and a space that required no explanations. Nora still ran the morning shift, but now she wore her sleeves rolled high, her tattoos no longer hidden, but displayed with pride. The broken-winged eagle etched into her arm had become a local symbol of endurance. A reporter from the regional newspaper had wanted to write a feature about the waitress with the war tattoo. Raymond had kindly refused on her behalf. "Some stories," he said, "are too sacred for the front page. Some legacies aren't meant to be headlines." On a mild Wednesday morning, Jake sat at his usual spot. But now he wasn't just a listener. He contributed. The month prior, he had enlisted in the National Guard, driven by what he'd heard and the humility he'd gained. "I used to think toughness meant being loud and acting tough," he said, "but hearing all of you, I've learned real strength is carrying burdens no one else can see." Raymond nodded, proud of how far the young man had come. The old vet had discovered new meaning, mentoring people like Jake, helping them understand that courage often wears unexpected faces. Nora approached with the coffee pot, her movement still smooth and sure, but now radiating confidence. As she topped off cups, she shared a memory about Landon she had never voiced before. "Our last night," she said, "Landon made us all promise something. He said if any of us made it back, we had to keep serving, not necessarily in uniform, but in a way that would honor the ones who didn't." She looked around. The tribute wall, the quiet crowd, young Jake scribbling notes for his future. "I think this is what he meant," she said gently. "Some awards live behind glass, clean and shining, but some honors exist in quieter places, in the curl of rising steam, in the exchange of stories over well-worn diner tables, in the moment a teenager sees the warrior behind the waitress's uniform." Nora Fields had borne her grief alone for over a decade. Now she carried it with others who understood, who remembered, who honored the lost, not through speeches or ceremonies, but by showing up, by listening, by remembering. Real heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes they serve coffee and pass down memories, one heartfelt conversation at a time. Subscribe if you believe true heroes wear their scars quietly and still serve, one cup at a time.